Are you ready?
Oh yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll just begin the program. Shall we go? Chandran sir, shall we go ahead? Chandran sir is also there. So ma'am, we'll go ahead. So good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Institutional Innovation Council of the Pillai Institute of Management Studies and Research and International Women's Federation of Commerce and Industry, India National Chapter, I'm delighted to welcome each one of you to the webinar on entrepreneurship, the way forward for economic empowerment on this occasion of the World Entrepreneurship Day. This is a day for the last few years that we have been observing as to promote entrepreneurship among our students and faculty members. A special welcome to Dr. Mukund Rajan, our esteemed guest speaker, who has spared his precious time to share his journey with us today. I welcome Dr. David Pillay, Dr. R. Chandran, members of IWFCI from national and international, heads of institutions, faculty members, and students who have joined us today. Let me now invite Dr. Daphne Pillay to say a few words. To introduce her, Dr. Pillay is the chairperson of the Management Board of Mahatma Education Society that runs 48 educational institutions in Mumbai and Navi Mumbai under the banner of Pillay Group of Institutions. She was a recipient of the ASSOCHAM Women Achiever of the Year Award at the Women's Leadership and Empowerment Summit held in association with the Ministry of Women and Child Development, Government of India, in recognition of her contribution to women's empowerment through social entrepreneurship initiatives. It was conferred on her by the Honorary Union Minister of Women and Child Development, Mrs. Smriti Irani. Dr. Pillay founded the NGO Seroptimist International of Bombay Chembur in the year 1997 with the objective of helping marginalized women and girls. The club is affiliated to Seroptimist International that has consultative status in the United Nations. She was selected to represent Seroptimist International, Great Britain and Ireland at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, CSW 62 in New York, where she spoke on challenges and opportunities in achieving gender equality and empowerment of rural girls. She was a committee member of the Women's Development Cell of University of Mumbai for 2 terms. Dr. Daphne Pillay is a founder president of International Women's Federation of Commerce and Industry, India National Chapter. This federation works globally to promote entrepreneurship among women. I now invite Dr. Pillay to please speak a few words. Over to you, Dr. Pillay.
Thank you, Selena, for that introduction. Let me introduce the IWFCI, the International Women's Federation of Commerce and Industry, founded by the visionary Miss Diana Abruzzi in the year 1992. The organization was established with the purpose of supporting women entering business and developing trade across the globe. Today, IWFCI remains first and foremost an empowering opportunity for women to meet and engage with like-minded entrepreneurs to grow their businesses in a supportive network. Through their global chapter networks, the IWFCI holds business summits, virtual fireside chats, social networking events, trade fairs, and educational programs like today's seminar, which introduces students to the benefits of entrepreneurship as a career, and bringing business-minded people from across the globe to network, grow, and prosper. As president of the IWFCI India National Chapter, I welcome you all to the seminar on entrepreneurship, the way forward for economic empowerment. And to speak on the subject, we have Dr. Mukund Rajan, co-founder and chairperson of ECube Investment Advisors Private Limited. He is the best person to speak on the subject as he has given up a prestigious and lucrative career with the Tata Group to start his own company. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pillay. I now invite Dr. R. Chandran, the Executive Director of Pillay Institute of Management Studies and Research, to speak a few words. Dr. Chandran is an effective motivator, a good team leader, and a much-loved student-centric teacher. He has a PhD in international business and brings with him a rich industry work experience. Dr. Chandran has authored 4 books on international business. He's a much sought after speaker and has conducted sessions for Ahmedabad Management Association, World Trade Center, Indo-African Chamber of Commerce, among others. Chandran sir, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Selina. Indeed, it is a great moment to witness such a wonderful audience on this auspicious day, that is Entrepreneurship Day. The title which has been given is excellent. Entrepreneurship, the way forward for economic empowerment. In this occasion, I would thank IIC of PiMSR and IWFCI, the world body today. Thanks to Dr. Mukund Rajan for having consented to be our chief guest today and resource person of this moment. Dr. David Pillay, Dr. Rima Ramachandran, Dr. Selina, Dr. Saida Sheikh, Dr. Betty Sibal, and all the dedicated team for having organized such an excellent program. Professional success may bring happiness to individual. Within 2-3 active service years after graduation or post-graduation, is occupying vice president, managing director, CEO, or global head. But it's having its own limitation. Individual will be happy, the family will be happy, near and dears will be happy. But entrepreneurship brings, obviously, delight of a success and excitement to the community. One education entrepreneur in Bombay has brought delight to minimum 3,000 intellectuals and teachers. Of course, thousands and thousands of students must have gone and settled abroad. Their blessings will be here. That's called delight. One Zoho representative called Sridhar Vembu in an unknown place from Tenkasi is able to generate 9,000 employees, 9,000 families are prospering. And many Fortune 500 companies are in his list as clients. Fortunately, we are having abundant of resources. Every sector entrepreneurial opportunities are scattered, just we have to pick it up. Maybe agriculture, processed food, chemicals, healthcare items like formulation, bulk drugs, handicrafts, handloom, seafood, textiles, garments, accessories. So the list is going on and on. Fortunately, we are gifted with the government policy today, whether it is Atmanirbhar Bharat or it is Yojana or any other form, Make in India, everything is given to us just like a plate. We have to just pick it up and make a prosperous life for not only us, to others too. Sri Ratan Tata, Sri Azim Premji, Sri Narayana Murthy, and many other people are coming forward to hold the hands of startups and making ventures successful. Many venture capitalists or angel investors are also coming forward to help all the youngsters. This is the right moment. Our entrepreneurs should come forward to take up and enjoy the delight and excitement of success. Hope our people may enjoy and may try to enter into new ventures and give life to the community, life to the society, and build the nation through economic empowerment in terms of prosperity and also success. Best of luck. God bless every one of you who have attended and try to make the seminar, a webinar so successful. Let us all listen to the luminary of today, Dr. Rajan.
Thank you, Chandran sir. Chandran sir, you have always motivated us as IIC faculty members and the students for entrepreneurship activities. Thank you for your support. I now invite Dr. Rama Ramchandran, Director Services of IWFCI, International Chapter, to introduce our eminent guest speaker, Dr. Mukund Rajan. Dr. Rama is currently engaged as a business development consultant after an illustrious banking career of 2 decades with ANZ Grindlays and Standard Chartered Bank across different verticals like international training, credit cards, retail, and wealth management. She was the past National President of Indian Association of Secretaries and Administrative Professionals, a 40-year-old organization with 6 chapters across India. She is the National Program Action Chairperson of the National Association of Seroptimists International of India, NASI, and Director of Sigbee Trading Limited. Over to you, Dr. Rama Ramchandran.
Thank you, Selena. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have the proud privilege of doing the introduction of Dr. Mukund Rajan. Dr. Mukund Rajan is the chairman of ECube Investment Advisors, a first of its kind platform created in 2019 to catalyze environment, social, and governance, which is called ESG, ESG changes in corporate India. Prior to this, he held a number of senior executive positions through his 23-year career with the Tata Group, where he served as the first brand custodian of the Tata Group, Chief Ethics Officer of the group, Chairman of the Tata Global Sustainability Council, and member of the Group Executive Council at Tata Sons. He served on the boards of various Tata companies, including Tata Teleservices, Tata Communications, Tata SIA Airlines, and Tata AIG. Dr. Rajan serves as the chairperson of the Environment Committee of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, which is called FICCI, and is a member of the Council of Management of the Forum of Free Enterprise. Dr. Rajan graduated from the BTech program at the Indian Institute of Technology, IIT Delhi, in 1989. He completed a master's and doctorate in international relations on a Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford University. His doctoral dissertation, Global Environmental Politics, was published by Oxford University Press in 1996, and his second book, The Brand Custodian, My Years with the Tatas, was published by HarperCollins in 2019. His next book on corporate responsibility and ESG, co-authored with Dr. Colonel Rajiv Kumar, is due for publication by HarperCollins later this year. Today, Dr. Mukund's talk will be focused on his journey of entrepreneurship, the challenges faced and opportunities seized during this journey, as also the role of entrepreneurship in economic empowerment and other aspects of entrepreneurship. Over to you, Dr. Mukund Rajan.
Thank you so much, Rema, and thank you all so much for having me here today on this important occasion. Let me try and see if I can.
You've muted yourself, Dr. Rajan. We can see your screen, but you, yes, fine. We can hear you now. Yes, we can hear you.
It's full screen now. Okay, lovely. Great. So thank you all so much once again for having me today with you on this very important day. The flow of my talk for the next 40 odd minutes will be as follows. I'm going to describe some of my key learnings at the Tata Group. Thereafter, I'm going to outline the entrepreneurial career that I've embarked upon after leaving the Tatas. And I will then conclude with some observations on entrepreneurship in India. So let me start with my stint with the Tata Group, India's largest corporate house. As Rama mentioned, I do have a book titled The Brand Custodian, which will probably tell you a lot more than I might be able to cover today during this talk. I describe in it the successes and the disappointments that I experienced while working at the Tatas. The period that I was with the Tatas, of course, starting from the 1990s for 2 decades, was a period of enormous economic transformation in India. It was a period that saw the liberalization of the economy, the entry of extremely competitive foreign technology leaders and multinational corporations, and the gradual strengthening of the legal framework governing the operation of both listed and unlisted companies in India. So I joined the Tatas straight out of university because really as a group, they seemed to stand for the kinds of values that I respected. They were pioneers of industry with a commitment to national development and a reputation for integrity. They're also an unusual capitalist organization, majority owned as they are at the holding company level by public charities, the Tata Trusts. The Tata Group has managed to hold on to the tag of a top 10 corporate in India for every decade over the past 100 years. So I felt the group's longevity and success would offer important learnings for a young manager like me. After my initial induction in the Tata Administrative Service, the fast-track general management cadre of the Tata Group, I was assigned to the chairman, Ratan Tata's office. I became his longest-serving executive assistant and chief of staff for over a decade. In that period, the Tata Group morphed from a strong Indian industrial group into an international powerhouse. Several important initiatives allowed this to happen, including the unification of a somewhat disparate group of companies through the creation of fora like the group management meets, which brought senior managers from various Tata companies together, and the creation of a common brand architecture. The drafting of the Tata Code of Conduct to define and govern individual and company behavior, the development of the Tata Business Excellence Model to benchmark operational performance against the best in the world, and perhaps most importantly, the injection of ambition, for which I credit Ratan Tata's determination that Tatas should accept the challenge of foreign enterprises and be prepared to compete on equal terms with them anywhere in the world. My years with Ratan Tata were filled with excitement and learning. I have to say, though, that for many people to whom it may appear glamorous from the outside to watch large corporations at work, on the inside, there is a huge amount of stress. There is constant fear that high stakeholder expectations may not be delivered. One of the biggest challenges of leadership is that it can get lonely at the top. In my book, I make the point about Ratan Tata that, and I quote, throughout his career, it seemed that he was waging lone battles, most of the time with only a few, if any, of his compatriots sharing the stress and pain of being in the battlefield with him, unquote. During my time with Ratan Tata, I became very closely involved in an industry that saw the largest capital investment at the time for the Tatas, telecommunications. I was appointed to serve on the boards of all the Tata telecom companies. A common dream of young managers is to become a CEO before the age of 40. And I achieved that dream when I was appointed the managing director of Tata's listed mobility play, Tata Teleservices Maharashtra Limited. This phase in my career was probably one of the most enjoyable. From being at the corporate headquarters of the Tata Group with a small staff, I was suddenly catapulted into 24/7 operations with the responsibility of managing over 3,000 employees and 10,000 plus feet on street and retailers. Telecoms was a tough industry with fast changing technology and regulation and powerful competitors. Perhaps the most important thing I learned during my telecom stint was the value of teamwork and of celebrating success as much as you can. This is vitally important to rally your team behind a common mission. At Tata Teleservices Maharashtra, whether it was the addition of every additional million new subscribers on our network, or launches of new products like the photon dongles, or the announcement of futuristic visions like Digital Mumbai, which offered India's fastest retail broadband speeds at the time, we kept celebrating. This helped us to deliver our best results to date, including market-leading mobile and broadband subscriber additions. Fate or luck then intervened. This is something that will be a recurrent theme in all our lives, the intervention of the unpredictable. I left the telecom industry just before the horrible impact of the so-called 2G scam. The scam slowed growth and eventually led to many telecom exits, including the closure or divestment of much of the Tata Telecom enterprise. I moved from telecoms into the world of private equity. I was asked to set up a new private equity fund for the Tatas that would tap into global pools of capital to support the growth of unlisted Tata companies. I consequently became the founding managing partner of the Tata Opportunities Fund. With $600 million committed by a clutch of sovereign wealth funds and large institutional investors, this fund became the largest debut fund out of India. Our investments over a period of time included unlisted companies like the DTH operator Tata Sky, the budget hotels company Roots Corporation, which manages the Ginger branded hotels, the EPC company Tata Projects, and several others. Our first public exit was through the auto components company in the lighting space, Varroc, which delivered a handsome multiple and invested capital of around 6 times. More IPOs are slated in the period ahead of us from the fund. My time in private equity exposed me to some of the smartest investors in the world, including some US billionaires who put money in my fund. I learned from them that it is possible to have great wealth while being very grounded and down to earth. I had the good fortune of being invited to attend the annual general meeting of Berkshire Hathaway, and I watched with amazement the tremendous energy and complete command of the subject displayed by Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. Both of them were in their 80s at that time, as they took questions from shareholders for several hours. By the way, they're still addressing shareholders, even at their AGM this year. Charlie Munger is now 97 years old, and Warren Buffett is 90 years old. While they attract envy, what can often be missed with the wealthy is the passion and determination to succeed that they can bring to their businesses and the risks that they're willing to take. Sometimes they bet their entire asset base to fund their dreams. This is why so many billionaires have been through bankruptcies, sometimes more than once in their careers. And perhaps the most famous of this lot is, of course, the former US President, Donald Trump. After my private equity stint in 2013, I was appointed as the first brand custodian of the Tata Group, where the new Tata Group chairman, Cyrus Mistry, who had just taken over from Ratan Tata. This role entailed responsibility for the Tata corporate brand. Additionally, since the Tata brand has been built on the twin pillars of commitment to society and good corporate governance, I was also appointed chairman of the Tata Global Sustainability Council with oversight of group corporate social responsibility or CSR activities, and as chief ethics officer of the Tata Group. In my new role, I experienced firsthand the huge impact on the Tata brand that the group's reputation for ethics and good governance had. With a mission statement that articulated the group's commitment to improve the quality of life of the communities we serve, I felt it was important to reinforce the connect of Tata people with this mission. One of the initiatives I'm most proud of in this regard was the volunteering effort we launched called Tata Engage, which became India's largest corporate volunteering program, delivering over 1 million hours of volunteering each year during the time I was there. In 2016, the Tata Group went through an existential crisis with the exit of Cyrus Mistry. The repercussions of that are still being felt today. This event prompted me to think about what I wanted to do next. I felt at the time that I had delivered whatever I could at the group, and there was the strong attraction of possibilities outside the group. One development in particular encouraged me to strike out on my own. This was in late 2017, a couple of quarters before I finally left the Tatas. Spurred by talk that the Tatas were planning to shut down the telecoms business, I led a group of employees in stitching together an offer to acquire the Tata's broadband assets. Now, these are the assets that the recent COVID period has shown are critically important, enabling strong internet connectivity, including video conferencing calls like the one we are all on currently. So I stitched together a $1.3 billion transaction with support from a consortium that included one of the largest private equity funds in the world and one of the largest Canadian pension funds. Had the offer been accepted, it could have been India's largest management buyout. The transaction didn't go through for various reasons, but it did persuade me that today in India, there is capital available to back good ideas led by strong teams. And I think this is a point that Professor Chandran was just making a few minutes back. So that brings me to life after the Tatas. Along with former colleagues from the Tata Group, I founded a new company, ECube, which, as the name suggests, is drawn from 3 E's: engage and empower for ESG. The idea is to work with Indian companies and help them on their journey to improve their ESG performance, that is their environment, social, and governance performance, by innovating ideas across asset classes, including debt, equity, and advisory services. ESG is the new buzz in the investment community. The E in ESG, environment, encapsulates the natural resources a business consumes, the pollution it creates, the carbon emissions it generates, and many other environmental impacts. The S, social, refers to the links and ties a business develops with the local community, the way it treats its employees, its focus on diversity and inclusion, and its reputation as a trusted partner to stakeholders. G, or governance, deals with how a business is governed, including board effectiveness protocols, audit controls, approach to senior executive compensation, and appropriate reliance on independent directors. ESG issues critically influence the sustainability and resilience of businesses. Over $100 trillion, that's trillion with a T, of invested funds around the world have now subscribed to the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, or the UNPRI, which require investors to incorporate ESG issues into their investment analysis and decision-making processes. ESG funds have attracted record inflows during the COVID pandemic. Over half of all European fund flows today, and a quarter of all US fund flows go to sustainable funds. And in India too, a clutch of new ESG-focused funds have been launched in swift succession. Our belief at ECube, and there is considerable academic research to back this, is that a greater focus on ESG typically yields greater resource use efficiency, lower cost of operations, reduced risk and therefore reduced insurance premium, minimized regulatory and legal interventions, higher employee engagement and an ability to attract better talent, greater employee productivity, lower cost of borrowing, and increased analyst coverage and investor interest. Consequently, businesses that focus on improving their ESG performance tend to outperform their peers. While the space is relatively nascent in India, there is useful data available from, for instance, the MSCI India ESG Leaders Index, which has outperformed the broader benchmark index for most periods of time since its inception in 2007, including the past 3, 5, and 10-year periods. Similar consistent outperformance is witnessed with the National Stock Exchange, the NSE's Nifty 100 ESG index when compared with the Nifty 100 index. The body of empirical evidence on this ESG advantage continues to grow. There are strong regulatory tailwinds in favor of a new focus on ESG in India. These include the stewardship codes, which emphasize ESG requirements, prescribed for institutional investors across the mutual fund, insurance, and pension fund sectors, as well as the business responsibility and sustainability reports that the Securities and Exchange Board of India, SEBI, has mandated the top 1,000 listed companies to publish. We're already seeing that an ESG focus presents forward-looking companies with the opportunity to advantageously pivot their business models ahead of the competition and identify new ways to secure competitive advantage. So this explains why, for instance, a thermal power producer like Tata Power has pivoted towards a big renewable energy play to address the whole issue around climate change. More companies are now focusing on resource use efficiency and embracing circular economy practices that minimize waste across product life cycles and prioritize better design for reuse, repair, and recycling. This is also throwing up many new business opportunities across segments like energy optimization, electric vehicles, the Internet of Things, and the sharing economy. The new sensitivity to all of this is perhaps best epitomized by the announcement by Reliance Industries Chairman Mukesh Ambani of an ambitious net carbon zero target to be achieved by 2035, and his declaration at the Qatar Economic Forum a couple of months back that there is no option for Indian businesses but to go green. Parallel to my effort to create at ECube a business that combines profit with purpose, I'm also delighted to share with you another contribution I have made to the world of entrepreneurship. And this is my angel investment in my wife, Soumya's entrepreneurial journey. So Soumya is a banker turned entrepreneur. There's an article on her that just appeared last weekend in the Mint Lounge that's shown on the slide. So in 2010, she decided to leave a cushy job to establish what has today become India's largest multifamily office, offering wealth advisory services to over 100 business families and advising on over $3.6 billion of assets. It's the largest independent multifamily office in India. The company is called Waterfield Advisors, and its unique proposition is a pure advisory, no conflict of interest model. Unlike many private banks, Waterfield does not manufacture its own products and does not accept distribution fees from product manufacturers. Its interests are therefore fully aligned with the client's interests, and it only recommends products based on the client's risk appetite. Waterfield is also unique as a woman-founded company with 50% of the leadership team being women. In describing how Soumya has built a company, and I shared much of her journey, her struggles, I can do no better than to quote her. So the quote, building a business is like a roller coaster ride, from the exhilarating highs to that sinking feeling in your stomach when you're hitting the lows. As an entrepreneur and CEO, the most important leadership lessons for me have been to help others dream big and realize their full potential. It's about leading from the front and trusting your team. It's also about having difficult conversations, yet being fair, compassionate, and treating people with respect. Building a business is about patience, building it brick by brick. If you really want to create something valuable and sustainable for the longer term, there are no shortcuts, unquote. So Soumya outlines what she calls the first principles, the typical personal qualities of entrepreneurs, which I also subscribe to, and I've listed them in the slide. So first is F, future orientation. The I is investing in yourself. The R is risk-taking. S is self-awareness. And finally, T for teamwork. So let me now, in the final section of this talk, share some observations about the future of entrepreneurship in India. My first observation is that entrepreneurship is absolutely critical for this country. We need livelihoods to be created to accommodate the over 1 million young people who enter the job market every month. The organized sector and the government have limitations on how much investment they are capable of making and how many jobs they can create. Further complicating matters is the advent of new technologies and automation that are reducing the need for manpower in many industries. So where companies like Tata Steel, for instance, employed close to 100,000 people to produce a little over 1 million tons of steel 3 decades back, they can now produce 20 times that amount with 1/3 of the employee base. For job creation to take place at scale, we need millions of entrepreneurial ventures. A lot of this is now beginning to happen, and you certainly see some of the biggest success stories in the tech sector. More and more Indians are entering an interconnected digital system. India has 1.2 billion unique Aadhaar accounts, over 1 billion mobile subscribers, and over 400 million smartphone users. Seizing the momentum from the COVID-induced constraints on physical movement, digital services across e-commerce, telemedicine, edtech, online banking, online stock trading, streaming entertainment, and the like have all flourished. The recent IPO of Zomato, the restaurant aggregator and food delivery startup, whose market cap has crossed $14 billion, has clearly been a watershed moment in the history of the Indian tech ecosystem. The space is likely to see the seeding of many more startups. By some accounts, India has the 3rd largest startup ecosystem now in the world, with over 55,000 startups, and by 2025 is likely to host 100,000 startups and at least 150 unicorns. For those keen to be part of the tech ecosystem, there will be a critical need to acquire the relevant digital technology skills. Indeed, and this is true not just for the digital industry, but for all industries, we have to accept that there is going to be no substitute for continuous learning. We will all need to keep investing in ourselves and improving and reshaping our skills to stay relevant. The next observation I want to make is that if you want to outcompete your competition, you need an edge. And that usually comes from innovation and intellectual property creation. And yet, our national gross expenditure on R&D in science and technology as a percentage share of GDP has been stagnant at 0.6 to 0.7% for the last 2 decades. This is far lower compared to other BRIC nations even. China, for instance, spends 2.1%, and that on a far larger GDP base. In developed countries like Japan at 3.2%, Germany at 3%, and the United States at 2.8% also spend much more. My personal belief is that this is Indian industry's Achilles heel. Leading Indian businesses are spending a fraction of the percentages that companies like Apple or Google spend. This is even true of the IT industry, where India has otherwise made a mark globally. So a pioneer like Mr. Narayan Murthy, the founder of Infosys, laments that the biggest challenge that the Indian IT industry has faced in the last 40 years and has still not solved is the inability to move from being reactive problem solvers to proactive problem definers and solvers. The third observation I want to make is that there is a need for growth in India to be inclusive. Let me call out 2 areas of inclusion that are critically important for India. The first is women's inclusion in the workforce. India has one of the lowest levels of female participation in the workforce anywhere in the world. By not making women as welcome in the workforce as many other nations, India misses out on their income generation capabilities, which could significantly increase its GDP as a nation. Moreover, denying many women the opportunity to be independent and enjoy the self-esteem and confidence that comes from earning for themselves lies at the root of many social evils in India. To address gender diversity in the workforce, there are a host of steps that we need to take as a nation. These range from investing in the education of the girl child to basic hygiene factors around women's safety, access to public toilets, providing better public transport infrastructure, and from eliminating discrimination in the workforce to offering far larger volumes of risk capital accompanied by light touch regulation to enable more women to start businesses. A second area of inclusion failure is the poor absorption of representatives of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities in Indian workforces. There is a real possibility that a future government may choose to legislate reservation for these communities in the private sector if the absorption numbers do not improve. What we need is a more dedicated focus, not dissimilar to the needs of women, on the critical E's, education, employment, employability and skilling, and support and availability of risk capital for entrepreneurship. My final observation is that businesses today operate under enormous scrutiny from a variety of stakeholders. They're like that goldfish in a bowl. These include customers across the globe who are increasingly demonstrating a preference to embrace brands that have a societal purpose, governments that are increasingly capable of influencing domestic agendas in other countries, as we are seeing indeed at the moment with the call within the European Union for a border carbon adjustment mechanism, multinational enterprises that are raising ESG compliance standards for their supply chain participants, investors who are concerned about the risks the companies they invest in run, judicial activists and nonprofits who want to hold companies to account for their lapses, and many others. Thanks to social media networks, no organization or brand, irrespective of stature or legacy, is now able to escape scrutiny. No matter how famous you may be or how big your reputation, the sins of the past can now catch up with you even after many years. One illustration of this is, of course, the hashtag #MeToo movement, where large numbers of women across the world came forward with descriptions of harassment and sexual abuse they had faced in the past, sometimes decades earlier, and named and shamed the men responsible. To build confidence in their businesses, therefore, entrepreneurs need to create trust amongst a wide cross-section of stakeholders. And the best way to do this, to my mind, is by transparently embracing strong values and business ethics. So what do corporates that care about ethics and values do differently? I would suggest that it is their focus on at least 4 areas that makes the difference. Leadership and the tone at the top, significant investment in securing employee commitment, visible and well-communicated action against transgressions, and finally, robust internal control processes and measures. So let me touch upon each of these, drawing on my experience from working with the Tata Group, which has managed to survive for over 150 years based on the trust it has built with its stakeholders. So let's start with the tone at the top. The commitment to good corporate governance needs to be visibly demonstrated by the leadership of an organization. Discussions around the company's ethical health, governance processes, compliance frameworks, and risk management need to be elevated to the level of the board. At Tata's, the business philosophy of the founder, Jamsetji Tata, set that tone. He famously said that in a free enterprise, the community is not just another stakeholder in business, but is in fact the very purpose of its existence. So Jamsetji Tata felt that corporates have a responsibility to concern themselves with the quality of life of the communities they serve. If the community is not successful, if the customers, suppliers, lenders, and indeed investors in that community are not successful, it is hardly likely that the corporate that serves that community will survive. The tone at the top also plays an important role in securing the commitment of the employees. Engaged employees can be the best brand ambassadors of a company. The focus on people is the second key factor that really helps organizations to sustain a culture of ethics and good corporate governance. I spoke earlier about the volunteering initiative that I launched at Tata's, and the images on this slide capture the volunteering engagements undertaken by Tata people across the world. This was one meaningful way to align the organization's core purpose and values with the personal value system of the employees. The third key factor is the importance of walking the talk on ethics. Let me share with you one illustration from recent Tata history. I refer to the case of Tata Finance, a company that operated in several areas of financial services in the early 2000s. A whistleblower communication citing irregularities in Tata Finance revealed that tens of millions of dollars had been lost in misdirected investments through step-down subsidiaries in stocks of speculative quality. But worse, many transactions were found to have been done to secure personal profits for a handful of managers. The Tata leadership reacted swiftly to the situation. First, it publicly guaranteed that the investment of each and every public depositor in Tata Finance would be protected in full. Second, action was promised against all those whose guilt was established, howsoever influential they might be perceived to be. In fact, the then managing director faced criminal prosecution and ended up spending some years in jail. Third, full disclosures were made to all the regulatory authorities. In fact, Tatas are still in court on various matters relating to those days from 19 years back. But by standing by their investors, prosecuting the guilty, and ensuring transparency and full disclosure in all actions, the Tata Group emerged from a situation where the trust it enjoyed would have been massively eroded to one where its brand equity and reputation were in fact substantially enhanced. All of these actions were completely in line with the Tata Code of Conduct, which brings me to the fourth key factor, having robust internal processes and controls, and providing the relevant tools for employees and businesses to be able to conduct themselves in a values-driven manner. The Tata Code of Conduct is one such tool. It guides Tata employees by laying down the ethical standards that they need to observe in their professional lives and reinforcing the group's value system. A key requirement of the code is the nurturing of an open and transparent environment where employees can freely speak up when there is a violation of the code. Under the Tata Brand Equity and Business Promotion Agreement, all Tata companies are required to adopt the code in order to be able to use the Tata brand, which is owned by the holding company, Tata Sons. And each Tata company also submits an annual code of conduct compliance statement to Tata Sons. And we in fact created frameworks to provide feedback to the companies on areas of improvement. I think such measurement is important, and it helps because it is increasingly being expected by sophisticated institutional investors that businesses will make transparent and comprehensive disclosures on ESG issues. As the head of the world's largest money manager, BlackRock, Larry Fink says, to prosper over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show how it makes a positive contribution to society. Companies must benefit all of their stakeholders, including shareholders, employees, customers, and the communities in which they operate. If you can build trust with your stakeholders, it is more than likely that you will build a business that can be successful into the long term, delivering sustainable, profitable growth. Let me stop there. I think you've all been listening very patiently, and what would be terrific now is to make this more interactive, and I'd be very happy to take your questions. So thank you all very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Yeah,
so
back to you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rajan. That was absolutely, engaging. Couldn't even move your eyes for a minute here and there. So we have opened the chat box for questions, and then requesting all the participants to put up their questions there. While they put up, I'm just going to ask you my first question. So when you shifted from being for so many years at the Tata Group, when you took that first decision to move on your own? What were some of the fears that you had? Because we have many students, faculty members. So for students, it may be, I don't want to work. I want to be a job creator right away, and I want to start. And for faculty members who want to, also think of other opportunities, and all the other members who have joined here today. So what are some of the fears and challenges that you faced just before you took that, that leap of, entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so certainly I think there's always the concern that you no longer have the big umbrella over your head. I'd spent 23 years in the Tata Group. Obviously, when you're in Tata's, a lot of things get done without you having to try very hard. Suddenly, when that shelter vanishes, you are a little alone in the world, wondering whether you're going to get the support you need, whether people that you might reach out to will take your calls, whether investors will have an interest in supporting your business ideas. All of those fears are natural. And I think it's also important to be able to have some amount of, your own reserves that you can draw on, financial reserves, so that it sees you through for a period of time when business may be initially slow. Fortunately, in my case, 10 years back, I was an angel investor in my wife's project. And then almost 10 years later, she became sort of the backstop for me. And I had that confidence that there's at least one breadwinner in the family. But yes, you have those initial pangs and anxieties. But very quickly, you start seeing that if you've got sensible thoughts, there are lots of people out there willing to help, willing to ideate with you, willing to become partners. And my case was, I guess, a little unusual because these days, entrepreneurs, many of them are very young people. The only thing I will take a dig at them and say is there's a Forbes article which suggests that some of the most successful entrepreneurs are people who are over the age of 45. So one may take a little bit of confidence from that, and maybe for people who are your peers, colleagues in academia as well, that's a source of strength that maybe we have the experience that allows you to deliver much more. But young people, they have no worries, no fears. I think many of them who straight out of management school are trying to do a startup. Hats off to them. And since they haven't been through the sort of stages of life that some of us have, they don't know that they need to be worried or fearful. Much more willing to take risks. So I think that's at the core of it. You have to have that ability, willingness to tackle the uncertain and to engage with a certain level of risk. If you can do that, you'll be fine.
Okay, thank you. So we have our IWFCI member, Anne Fua from Singapore, who wants to ask a question. Anne, can you unmute and ask? Would you like to do that? Or can I ask your question for you?
It's okay.
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Rajan, thank you very much. Very enriching sharing experience that you have. Very interesting. I'm an environmentalist and have been for the last 40 over years. And also an entrepreneur. My concern has always been about ethical business. Some companies may claim that, yeah, we are very ethical in our businesses, but now we can see it is not happening because I felt that the monitoring by companies are not there. Like for instance, when you're doing accounting, you have auditors to audit your businesses, compliances and all that. But with ethical code of practice, protecting the environment is not there. So how do you think, from your experience, share that with companies who claim that they are responsible and ethical in their business approach?
Right. So I think a lot of the pressure for change, unfortunately, in countries like India, has tended to come from regulation. So first, there has to be the regulation in place. Otherwise, far too many of these corporations tend to take the easy way out, tend to take shortcuts, tend to not make accurate or honest disclosures. And that has been a huge problem in the past. But I think in India, a lot of that is changing now. Investors and lenders who've lost money backing the wrong horses have now started seeing that, the chickens have come home to roost. So now they're changing the way they approach all of this. And regulation is helping this. I think India now has pretty strong regulations on corporate governance. In fact, some company leaders would say that there's too much regulation in India, perhaps, and some of it continues to come. So the business responsibility and sustainability reports, these are new disclosures, for instance, that the stock market regulator has put out. So from this year on a voluntary basis and next year on a mandatory basis, the top 1,000 listed companies in India have to add a strong section on sustainability considerations. I think these kinds of regulations open up these corporations to much greater scrutiny. And then there's a bunch of actors, including nonprofit organizations, public policy institutes, outside investors, equity analysts, who are all offering commentary on these companies based on these disclosures. So that's why I said corporates are now like goldfish in a bowl. Lots of people looking at them and commenting. And I think the more forward-looking ones recognize that if they don't respond to some of these stimuli, they're going to get left behind. They will no longer be able to attract the better quality of investors. They won't be able to attract patient capital. So the time for change is now. But it is a little bit of a journey. I don't think everyone adapts equally well and equally at the same time. It will take time. But I think there are enough now lessons and people who paid a price in the Indian market to give confidence to the others that it is the right thing to do. Within companies, I think obviously some of the points that I mentioned, the tone at the top is very important, the kind of messaging that the leaders send out, the kind of responsibility the board takes upon itself, all these are very important. And then of course, having the processes in place, the kind of organizational structure to support some of the initiatives the company has to take, the ability and willingness to make capital investment decisions, all of this is to be supported by a strong organization structure. I think all this is beginning to change and beginning to happen in Indian companies. So that's the good news. Is it happening fast enough? Probably not at this point of time, but we will all live in hope.
Okay, thanks.
Quickly, just one more question, that's it. Now we
Yes.
see the changes in the industries on paper, for instance, but that is good invention, which has created a lot of communications, but I think we have over abused it. Trees are being cut down and damaging the environment. Then we see the plastic conditions as well. Overuse of plastics, of course, consumers are not responsible as well. People just take and throw. Now, because of development going on, there's a new material.
So you've gone on mute.
And you've gone muted. You're mute
And you're on mute.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I say it's new because it is still in the market, but not overly used. It is called, let me see, sorry. Magotherm, Magotherm. It is a material which is added onto cement or construction industries, pipings, and all that. It's being patented, so we don't know exactly what material is there. They claim that it is good for the environment because it cuts down the heat and it cuts down the coldness as well, which is good because we save on the air conditions and the heater and all that. But how do we monitor these people with such material? How do we monitor them? So again, we're talking about ethical business. And it's now flooding. It's gone from Europe to China and it's now coming to Asia. It's a good invention.
Right. So sorry, I didn't understand the question. Is it how do you make sure that these kinds of new product introductions don't impact the environment? So again, you have regulations around that. You have standards councils, for instance, in India that will look at new materials that are being introduced. If there are question marks that are raised, for instance, by academics or scientists or nonprofit organizations, with the content of these materials, the government does step in and look at those. A couple of years back, for instance, there's this big hue and cry, but the content of some of the Indian food products the honey that is sold in the market, for instance. There were questions about ingredients in beverages. So a lot of questions do get raised. And when they come up, I think the regulators and the authorities do look into those. If people feel sufficiently agitated, they can move to courts. Often the courts have stepped in and blocked the sale of new products until there is complete validation that there is no adverse impact on human health, life, or the environment. I think the good news is the courts are now becoming much more pro-environment. I think a great example of that has been a lot of the judicial action around the issue of clean air, particularly around the Indian capital of Delhi. And many of the actions that the courts have taken have been far beyond anything that the executive on its own would have chosen to do. So I think there are sufficient checks and balances in India now. But obviously, all this is a work in progress. Mistakes can happen, and then there is an opportunity to correct it. I think the good news is, as a democracy, there are enough agents to sort of keep fighting for what they see as the public welfare.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rajan, for that. And thanks, Anne, for that question. We have Dr. Betty Sybil here asking a question. Dr. Sybil, would you like to unmute and ask?
Yeah, sure. First of all, let me thank you for keeping it so simple and relatable. I mean, it was a pleasure listening to you, and I'm also more happy that I could understand everything that you said. I have a very simple, I have a very simple question to ask you. With the current pandemic, what do you think? Are investments in ESG going to accelerate, or will it, see a deceleration?
What we've actually seen is an acceleration. As I mentioned, in Europe now, so much more of the fund flows are going towards sustainable funds. The same thing in North America. India has seen a clutch of new ESG focused funds that have been launched. In India, the amounts are not very high yet. I think it's just crossed maybe a little over 10,000 crores. But I think it's coming, and it's coming in a big way. A lot of it initially, I think, will be driven by overseas investors into the Indian market. And then I think the large Indian institutional players will start playing catch up. But I think the pandemic has really stimulated a lot of the thinking around ESG. And the most important issues are really reducing risk and looking at how companies build resilience. And that's what ESG is all about. How do you reduce your risks across each of E, S, and G? And how do you create a more resilient, more sustainable enterprise? That's what everybody wants. And people have seen that through COVID, unexpected events could really create the downfall of many ill-prepared organizations. So I think the focus on ESG will actually benefit, unfortunately in that sense, from what has happened with COVID.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sybil, for that question. Thank you, Dr. Rajan. We have Mr. K.P. Gopalakrishnan from Pillai Institute of Management Studies and Research who wants to ask the next question. Can you please unmute and ask?
Good evening, Mukund, Rajan. I am also, like you, an ex-employee of Tata's Taj Group of Hotels. And I am happy to meet you today after 30 years. In the 90s, I met you because I was the lobby manager there at Taj Hotel. Thank you very much. And I escorted you to a room many times, I still remember. Thank you. My question is simple. In spite of this record startup in India, I think I read in the newspapers, India is the record startup in the world. I don't know if it's right. And effort by the government and support. Our entrepreneurship success is lowest in the world. It's one of the lowest. So is there any way we can improve the entrepreneurship success? Because the wheels of the economy rest with these small and medium entrepreneurs who start their business. So my question is quite simple. So I think you'll put a lot of light on this. Okay.
It's a simple question, but it's got a hugely complex answer. But let me touch upon two areas where I'd say a lot more needs to happen. The first is India's large corporates, I think, have a huge responsibility to support startups. And they could actually benefit from a lot of the activity that's happening in the startup universe. Startups, by definition, are looking at innovation, are small and nimble, will move much faster than large, unwieldy corporates can. And yet, many of the large corporates are not actually very easy to deal with. They're extremely bureaucratic. There's this joke that the large corporates ask the government of India for ease of doing business, but they never respond to the small startups who are also requesting ease of doing business with the large corporates. If I send in a startup idea to Tata's or Birla's or Mahindra's, the chances of getting a positive response from an empowered person in the right location, the right industry, the right company is vanishingly small. It takes a lot of effort to figure out who's going to look at my great idea and can they support me thereafter. Even if the corporate wanted to saw that there was virtue in the idea, putting out the funds to support it is an incredibly complicated and very bureaucratic exercise in most Indian corporates. So I think one thing that has to change in the corporate world is that sensibility towards young and new companies and being willing to support and take some risk. Sure, there'll be occasions when you lose capital, but if you make it with one or two of these, it's a bit like the venture capital model. One or two will take care of the 50 that didn't work. So I think we need to see greater risk appetite on the part of corporate India to help startups. It's beginning to change, but a lot more can happen. The second big issue is, I think, the availability of domestic institutional capital. There are very few organized players who can support many of these startups. And that's why many of these startups end up going to foreign investors or indeed getting domiciled in foreign jurisdictions. They go to Singapore, they go to the United States. They're not able to do it in India, partly because of rules and regulations, but often because financing is not easily available. So we need to create a much greater infrastructure of institutional investors in this country who can offer risk capital at an early stage to many of these wannabe startups. But again, the good news is I think there are a lot of angel investors and networks that are now beginning to spring up. And I think it's also very nice that many of the startups that have made it big are now in turn supporting the next generation of startups. So if you look at Sanjeev Bikhchandani, for instance, who's made it huge and has been one of the promoters, for instance, of Zomato in the past, he's got a huge clutch of next generation startups that he's also supported. So I think that's a very, very good sign. So it's a matter of time, but it surely could be speeded up if some of these other changes also take place.
Thank you, Rajan. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Gopal, and thank you, Dr. Rajan, for that answer. We have one last question, after which we'll close. We have a question from Namrata Saxena. Would you like to unmute and ask?
Yes. Good evening, Dr. Rajan. That was really an enriching session. My question is, how do we attain a balance between development and environmental sustainability, be it the metro or the RA, which side and how do we attain it?
That's a very difficult question again. It's a simple question in the sense that you would hope that there shouldn't be a trade-off. And yet in our country, as we've seen time and again, on so many projects, there is eventually a trade-off. Even if you look at land acquisition, so many people, I think the last count is 60 million Indians have been displaced from the land, which has been acquired by the government, supposedly for public works that help the rest of the country. Now, they've tried to bring in regulation and legislation that improves the incentives or the benefits for people who surrender the land. But it's a very fraught issue. There isn't an easy answer. I mean, if somebody asked me to get off the land where I've lived for generations in order to accommodate a metro or something else, I mean, I would be very, very loath to leave my property. And yet I'm going to be pushed out if the government is able to just offer me 4 times market value or whatever the latest rate is. So it's a tough one. But I think the corporate world and the private sector is increasingly seeing that if you enter into projects that have these kinds of big question marks, it is beginning to impact reputation. I'll give you one example. One of the most sustainable and sort of committed enterprises in the world today is probably Unilever. And yet it's the same Unilever that 20 years back got into a controversy because they shut down a mercury production facility in India. And then there was questions about where the mercury and the thermometers that they were producing had been disposed of. Some of it had been left in the surroundings of the same property. And then there was a big campaign that hurt them, in fact, quite recently in the last few years. There was a rap artist, Sophia Ashraf, who sang a song which sort of brought a huge amount of embarrassment. And they finally went public and said they would clean up the facility, even though this had happened 2 decades back. and they took full responsibility. So they acted in the right way. But the point I'm making is, even the best organizations suddenly discover there are issues from the past, problems they've created. But the good news is they all realize that they're being watched. There is scrutiny. There's a brand reputation. It can rub off adversely on your ability to have future sales. And so I think going forward, fewer and fewer companies will want to invite any kind of controversy. So that's one growing sort of security that people won't do that. But the most important thing, I think, is for the public to come out and express itself. And that's where I think you need political parties who navigate this whole process of engagement with the community to take on board environmental considerations. I think it's a question we need to ask ourselves, why in India you don't have a national Green Party? It's a question worth thinking about. We all still have the old-fashioned, old generation political parties, but there's not one political party that's a Green Party. Yet in Europe, you see that the Greens are one of the strongest political forces. They've now changed the complexion of the European Council. And a lot of the focus on positive environment-friendly measures is happening because of them. So I think the public also has to have a sense of responsibility and accountability. And it was great in the Mumbai issue when people came and were hugging trees and quoting arrest and so on. And then, of course, the next government came in and reversed some of the charges against them. But they did go ahead with some of the projects, the coastal road and so on. So I guess, there will always be that tension. There aren't easy answers. But what you would hope is that the community now starts coming out in greater and greater force. And most importantly, in the politics of our land, voting for candidates who actually espouse these causes more importantly.
So we have...
Thank you.
Thank you, Namrata. And we have one last question, Dr. Rajan, if you have the time.
Sure. Please.
Okay. Munawra Kotiar is a young entrepreneur. Would you like to ask your question, Munawra?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Rajan. So as a new entrepreneur, who I'm trying to run a business that supports artisans, and I want to do it without having to exploit them. And from whenever I speak to other experienced entrepreneurs, they are like, the only way in today's e-commerce market to reach true profitability is to grow your business to a certain level where you can then sell it to another bigger company. Do you agree with that opinion about the e-commerce field today in India?
Again, a difficult one. I think to the extent that you're chasing quick success, maybe what you've been told is true, because the ability to pour in capital to acquire the eyeballs while continuing to fund losses is something that you can only do with deep pockets. And that's a model that many of the e-commerce companies seem to enjoy and pursue. And it's all about how much more you can pump in order to get the eyeballs and to get the traction with the customer base. On the other hand, if you are willing to sort of invest the time and build a high quality business that does deliver value, but build it slowly, I think there are options available. If I look at, to be honest, if I look at what my wife has done with wealth advisory services, it's been a slow grind. It's been 10 years. Success doesn't come easily. But you can build quality and you can get appreciation from customers, and you can create a strong brand. And eventually people then want to buy into that also. So there will be all kinds of investors looking for different things. There'll be some who want companies which have huge market potential and can be first movers. There'll be others who want a strong brand. There'll be yet others who are looking at your customer service scores and who want to back a business that is sustainably profitable. So I think you will have a clutch of investors that will answer your specific needs. What you have to decide, however, is really what you want out of all of this and how you're pursuing your ambition. Some people want to make money fast. Some people are willing to invest the time and effort. Again, a great example is what Jeff Bezos has done at Amazon. I mean, how many years did he keep making losses? And people kept wondering, is this going to be the end of Amazon? And yet here we are today, and he's one of the richest individuals on earth. His company has a market cap in trillions. So that was a particular way of building a business. Sure, everybody can't do that, but you need to be clear what it is that you're pursuing and what will give you satisfaction at the end of the day. And if you can figure all of that out, there will be a set of investors somewhere in the world, I can assure you, who will want to support that kind of approach.
Thank you. That was very encouraging, I must say. Munawwara, you want to say anything?
No, that's thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we have a few more questions, but we will send it to you now because we're really running short of time, I think. So I'll ask our Director of IWFCI International Chapter, Yvette Lee, to please propose a vote of thanks. And thank you once again, Dr. Rajan. It was an absolute delight to listen to you. It was simple, lucid, and as you rightly said, ESG is such a buzzword, and there's so much things going on around that we've been able to get into that space also at the right time. So here's to a lot more that we can see from ECube investments as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yvette,
really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yvette, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Selina Joy. It is my honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks after this very enlightening and motivating session on World Entrepreneurship Day 2021. On behalf of International Women's Forum of Commerce and Industry, India National Chapter, I extend my deepest gratitude to our speaker, Dr. Mukund Rajan, who has spared time from his extremely busy schedule to interact with us and also has very patiently answered all our questions. Today, we have had an opportunity to hear his life journey from the corporate world to being an entrepreneur. His talk exhibited his immense experience in the corporate world, his knowledge about the market, and his research that has made him a successful entrepreneur. Mr. Rajan, thank you for sharing your learnings. The one that really caught my ear was that while having great wealth, being grounded is extremely important. You spoke about values of patience, integrity, teamwork, and celebrating every success and helping others grow while you grow. Your outlook on women being an important part of the workforce indicates the importance of equality and the need for respecting women in the workforce, very similar to the vision of our organization, IWFCI. I thank Dr. Chandran, Director, Pillai Institute of Management Studies and Research, New Pandel, and the IIC team of this institute for putting this program together with great professionalism. Also, thank you to the logistics team led by Dr. Ashish Tripathi, who have made this virtual event possible. A special thank you to Dr. K.M. Vasudevan Pillai, CEO and founder of Mahatma Education Society, Pillai Group of Institutions, for joining us today and for always encouraging us in all our initiatives and plans. Thank you to all our IWFCI members from India who have joined us and from around the globe, especially Anne Phua and Elise Chin from IWFCI Singapore for attending this webinar and always supporting us. I thank members of Sir Optimist International Bombay Chamber, Sir Optimist International Delhi, and BNI as well, who have joined us today for this webinar. And thank you to all the heads of institutions, faculty, and students of the Pillai Group of Institutions and our other participants who have joined this webinar. I'm sure we are all greatly inspired by Dr. Rajan and have a lot of feedbacks after hearing him today. And I hope that all of us can put them into practice. On World Entrepreneurship Day, I'll end with this quote by Steve Jobs. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life. And the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking. Don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, everyone, and have a great evening. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you then. We'll end the meeting today. Thank you so much, all of you. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rajan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rajan. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
IWFCI India, excellent performance.
Thank you. We have to thank Dr. Rajan. Yes. Thank you. Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Yeah. Bye.